Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We are always there 24/7 on Galaxy 19 satellite, which reaches all the rural America with 57 million subscribers. And we are on OTT devices like Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku TV, cover Canada and Mexico through our satellite as well. You can download our apps on your iPhone or Android, or watch us on YouTube by just typing Muslim Network TV. Our website is also that, muslimnetwork.tv. And we are, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. Just type Muslim Network TV. We always have interesting conversation, but today's conversation is about rural America. People living in the cities wonder what it's like. Many of them have no idea. They might have driven past. So we would like to go deep in rural America and understand. To help us with that is a professor and an activist, Eric Oliver. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Oliver.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Eric Oliver is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago, where I graduated from long time ago. He's interested in all sort of politics, interesting like fat politics, conspiracy theory politics, and if Democrats and Republicans have conspired with each other to name their children differently. So we will hear a little bit about that, but more about rural America. We also has with us Catherine Coleman Flowers from Montgomery, Alabama. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, Catherine Flowers is environmental health researcher, writer, and founder of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. So what counts as rural America? Where is that? Have you seen it?
Well, I can start first because I grew up in rural America. I grew up in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is located between Selma and Montgomery, and people know it because of the historic Selma to Montgomery March. But rural America is actually most of America. When you get outside the cities, you're in rural America. And when I started doing this work, and I look around to kind of understand it myself, is that if you look at most area of the U.S., it's actually rural, the land area, but most people live in the urban communities that's more densely populated.
So what? How do you know, Eric, rural America?
Well, I think of rural America in two ways. There's the way that the government classifies rural America, which is basically if you're in a county that's not part of a metropolitan area and they have their own formulas for designating that based on, say, population density, then you're technically in rural America. And so that's one way of thinking of it. But I think it's also interesting to think about rural America as a state of mind. And we have a lot of research coming about that suggests that people in certain areas that may be designated as rural and may not be designated as rural think of themselves with a rural consciousness, like that people are now identifying themselves as being of the country. And that actually, that sense of identity is actually becoming a pretty important factor in shaping people's political views.
So it doesn't have to be a particular designation. It is just their own perception of themselves and what they are part of.
That's right.
That's interesting. So let's get some statistics. How many Americans live in whatever way we describe rural America? Somewhere I read about 1/5 of Americans live in rural area. Does it sound correct?
That's about right. That's where the Census Department would classify, according to my first scheme about how the census classifies people, is probably around 20% of the country. We've got about 25% who live in large cities, 26%, probably around 54% would be counted as suburbs or exurbs that are part of metropolitan areas. And then probably close to about 1/5 of the country, we would say,
in terms of population, but in terms of land mass, what will it be like? I mean, Catherine is saying that's most of America, it seems.
Oh yeah, it's so you can think about the fifth of the population living probably in about 90% of the land, at least 90% of the land mass.
Wow. So, so they have a lot of land, but do they? What percentage of that is owned by the rural people?
Well, I would say that this is probably one of the big mischaracterizations of rural America, and it goes back to our history. When you think about when, say, Europeans came forward and settled the United States and displaced Native Americans and kind of moved forward and started making farms, we tend to think of rural America as kind of farmers out in the countryside, on their own family farms. But that is increasingly no longer the case. When it comes to rural America, oftentimes it's people who are living in small communities, smaller towns. A lot of them do not, if they work in agriculture, they work for large agribusinesses. They don't necessarily work on their own family-owned farms anymore. And so what we've seen in rural America is kind of the shrinking a lot of traditional rural industries, the consolidation of agriculture into larger and larger businesses, and in some ways like I think a greater dislocation from the land. I remember my grandparents had a farm in rural Texas, and I would spend my summers with them, and we would tromp around and work on the farm and then go hunting and fishing on kind of local streams. And that kind of autonomy, I think, is really changing from rural America in terms of the availability of people on their own land kind of sustaining themselves. And that has really shifted quite a bit. So if you look at sort of if we say the 90% of land that's rural in character, a lot of it's owned by the government, a lot of it's owned by large corporations, a lot of it is not necessarily under the control of people who are in those rural circumstances.
But I like to give a different view of rural America from my perspective. I grew up in Lowndes County, and I still own land in Lowndes County. It's an area that at one point was, and you'll find this throughout the South, a lot of people that are in these rural communities have been there since their forefathers were brought there as slaves. And they ended up buying and staying in those communities, those that didn't migrate and go to the north. And in a lot of these communities, we still own the land, and our families have a tradition of having air property. Air property means that they did this intentionally to keep us tied to the land so that you can never sell it. So all the heirs end up having ownership in the property, so we can stay there and have some contacts. Actually, my family, one of the things that my father said, that we never want you to sell it because we want you to always have a place to go. So that's what, if you go throughout the Black Belt region of America, where you see a lot of African Americans have settled, you're going to find that being part of it. In terms of we've always had to be somewhat independent. When I grew up, we could not go to a grocery store every day because there was no grocery stores located there. You had to drive and have a car and be able to travel to town where you can get access to groceries or the other kinds of services that are generally provided. In the areas, even today, a lot of these rural communities are not just people of color, but Black folk, but some of them are migrant communities, and they don't have access to basic infrastructure, never have had it, and don't have it now. And I submit that what is happening in academic America and also the government, that they are not counting people in rural communities. Because when you go into Lowndes County, Alabama, for an example, we did a house-to-house survey, and you go there, and the way the formulas are set up, they're counting people based on mailboxes or addresses. And they may have a house there that's what we call a stick-built home, and all the rest of the homes are mobile homes. So they only count one family when each mobile home consists of a family. So I believe that the way we're counting families is actually undercounting the number of people that are in rural communities. Also, a lot of rural communities don't have access to internet, and GPS don't work there. And even in Lowndes County, which is outside of Montgomery, when you go into that community, you don't have access to GPS services. A lot of times, I have to tell people every time they come to visit, especially people from cities, write down the directions, take a map with you. And they always laugh at me and they get lost. So I just let them learn by experience. And the issue that I've been dealing with is the lack of wastewater infrastructure in these rural communities. A lot of the areas, because they're unincorporated, can't get access to government funding, which is so unfair because they're taxpayers. And therefore, a lot of the infrastructure that's needed, they don't get it.
So you're saying that when census is done, they're counting only the proper structures, not those people who are in mobile homes. Did I hear you?
What I'm saying is that if they're counting based on addresses only, and we've gone into areas, even in Lowndes County, we did a house-to-house survey to determine the extent of the wastewater problem. And we found that on properties where there may be 5 families and 1 address, the way the census is set, I used to be a census taker. That's why I know what I'm talking about. When I actually went out into these communities, they did it based on a formula and they did a statistical analysis. That's not correct. It may work in a city, but it doesn't work in a rural community. It makes more sense to find out how many people are connected to water, how many people are connected to the utility services. That way you'll find out, because usually, well, not even with water sometimes, I've seen them on 1 meter, and all these different families are connected to it. But with the way the power system is set up, that's a little different. It has to go to each house. And that way we may come up with a more accurate assessment of how many people are in rural communities than what we're doing right now.
Because census is so basic, a whole lot of things are connected, including allocation of resources. So are these people who are being counted as one family because of one address, they are related to each other or unrelated to each other?
A lot of them are related to each other, at least in the settlements that I'm familiar with, and especially the settlements in African-American communities, people are related to each other. And you would find that, again, they're tied to the land. I in my spare time, I do a lot of genealogical research, and because I'm trying to find my own family, and I'm finding more questions after taking DNA tests than I found answers. And in doing so, I go back and I look at census data. And if you look at census data going back to the 1800s, you will find that a lot of these families that have settled in these rural communities have been there for a very long time. A lot of the people have been there longer than some of the white families have been there. Some of the white families went to other areas fleeing slavery or trying to take it to the other areas with them. I'm trying to figure out how a lot of my family members ended up in Texas, for an example. But the reality is, when you look at these areas, you will find that these areas are also, the people that have been living there for years, and there are family connections. A lot of family graveyards are there. And the other issue that I like to bring up while we're talking is the environmental justice issues that happen in rural communities. In rural communities, I had an opportunity to go to, I keep bringing up Cancer Alley because I was surprised at what I saw there, but it's kind of a microcosm of some of the things that you would see in the South. In Cancer Alley, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, you see a lot of Black people that are descendants of the slaves that were brought to that area. You can even see the plantations, and next to the plantations, you'll see a lot of these petrochemical plants that they put there and poisoning the communities. But people don't see it because they're primarily in rural areas. They're not next to major cities. When I went to West Virginia, I saw where there was mountaintop removal, and people whose settlement patterns were very close to what I've seen. These were white people whose settlement patterns were very close to what I've seen in rural Alabama and the rural South, deep South. Yet they're dealing with the same kind of things: the lack of infrastructure, the lack of investment, the type of investment they generally get in rural communities, or investments that's destroying communities, destroying families, and not supporting that rural lifestyle. And consequently, the only kind of, in a lot of cases, government investment they can get is when they want to bring in a landfill or bring in a plant that they can't take to any other areas because the people are going to protest because it'll poison the environment.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we're talking with Professor Eric Oliver and Catherine Flowers about understanding rural America. Both have heritage there. We'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adam. You remember me? I appeared in so many episodes that Sound Vision has put on the market. No matter what. Hey, what's happening? Hey, oh, sorry. Lockdown is what it is. Well, continuing here. In this lockdown, Sound Vision never stops thinking about you, the viewer. We'll have to get back into production again, online and inline. Everybody in their own space, even me. Although I'm stuck with Lanisa.
Salam! Salam! Salam!
I know, you were shocked too. Well, let me continue. This is what I was going to say. Salam! 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 Cut! Finally, I get my own screen time again. Thank God. And so we invested in new equipment to bring you even better production with new songs and new singers and animations. Well, here are a few clips. And Sound Vision has brought all this into your home, making Islamic values and teachings easy. And if you know me, Adam, a multi-talented actor, well, sometimes I'm an actor and the reporter and the... Oh, that's enough. Let's move on to the next section. Well, you can watch these new episodes on our new app at www.adamsworldapp.com. We have previews happening every day on Muslim Network TV. Sound Vision has been serving generations, moving and changing with the times. We are all faithfully connected. That is a huge blessing. Your donation helps keep these programs available now and into the future. We take this job of helping tomorrow's Muslims today seriously, and you should too. Today, we need your help. Children absorb and learn from everything they encounter. Make that wholesome, positive, grounded in our faith. Together, we can accomplish our goal of raising better Muslims, better neighbors, and better citizens. Please donate generously. It's an investment in our future. But to finish, let me tell you, there are new scripts of my new mission. And it is something that I enjoy talking about. My new mission is space. Houston, we do not have a problem. Salam, see you soon. Me too.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. I'm talking with Professor Oliver and Catherine Flowers. Tell me this, Professor Oliver, that what is the state of American academics when it comes to rural America? Is this the part of America which not many people research, or is it thoroughly researched?
I would say somewhere in between. I think for a long time, it was kind of the neglected stepchild of a lot of social science research. Most researchers, when they were thinking about politics or when they were thinking about social justice or inequities, tended to focus on urban areas. But I think one of the interesting byproducts of the Trump election in 2016 was to suddenly bring a lot of attention and focus to rural areas, because it was the rural areas that were really decisive in kind of propelling Trump to his unlikely or unexpected victory in 2016. So in that period of time now, I know for example, in sociology and political science and even in economics, there's becoming greater attention to the issues and the problems that are facing within rural America. And as Catherine was suggesting, a lot of these have to do with problems of infrastructure, of environmental justice. There are also, with the opioid epidemic, for example, which is disproportionately affecting rural communities, questions of unemployment. Housing actually tends to be a really big problem and an understudied problem within rural areas. A lot of people in rural communities are actually finding difficulty in locating quality, safe housing. If you go to a lot of these communities, this is a central concern for local officials. And I think what we've seen in rural America is this displacement. The logic of rural America as it was founded was typically around farms and to a lesser extent around industry. And so you'll have like a lot of communities, particularly like, say, for example, here in the Midwest or even on the East Coast, these small towns that were factory towns. They were built around this one industry. And as those industries have gone and as America has deindustrialized, the whole logic for the community now comes into question. When the factory is gone, well, what is the purpose of the town anymore? Or, when a large agribusiness comes in and, consolidates all the family farms. And so now people are working, instead of farming for themselves, they're working for wages for a large agribusiness. What does that do to the dynamics of the communities? What does it do to our little, the civic space of the towns? And one of the things that we've seen is, I think this feeling of, for a lot of people in rural areas of, one might say a kind of being left behind or still here. A lot of these communities, people who would be taking advantage of the new economy, you say an information economy or service economy, are gravitating towards cities or gravitating towards suburbs. And the people who still have ties to the rural community, I think, as Catherine was suggesting, these may be from family legacies with respect to property. For a lot of them, I think there's a feeling of being neglected and left behind. And this I think partly informs the sense of rural consciousness. A lot of our research suggests that people in these rural areas feel antagonistic to big cities. There's a political scientist by the name of Kathy Kramer who teaches at the University of Wisconsin, and she has a terrific book called The Politics of Resentment. And she interviews a lot of people in these rural areas who describe this feeling of like they see all the resources of the state not going towards their community, but towards, in the case of Wisconsin, going to Madison or Milwaukee or the problems of the cities. And they feel like their own concerns are oftentimes neglected or left out of kind of larger political discussions. And I think this was probably what animated a lot of the support for Donald Trump and Donald Trump's kind of populism, was this feeling of anger of being left behind or being neglected. And I think this is particularly concentrated in kind of white communities in the Midwest and the upper Midwest, where you sort of saw his message resonating most strongly.
Well, I'll take it a step further than that. Coming from the South, I think some of Donald Trump's message resonated because of racism as well. And a lot of these places that still feel, I'm from Alabama. I'm in a very red state. And a lot of people here were so upset when Obama won that you couldn't find bullets, and you still can't find weapons here because of that. But I think at the same time, we have to realize that a lot of neglect that has happened in these rural communities, especially the ones that have been that where the political officials have been people of color, has been a long time systematic type of neglect that has happened that we can trace back to Reconstruction and going forward. And then even more so in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement in places like Lowndes County. I was the Economic Development Coordinator, so a lot of what I talk about is through firsthand knowledge. And I was told when I was trying to do economic development for Lowndes County that the only reason to go through Lowndes County was to get to Selma or to get to Montgomery. And that was coming from government officials with biases. A lot of the biases, I think, that were also undergirded by racism. And as a result, Lowndes County didn't get a lot of the things it should have gotten. Even if you look in the town of Hamer, which is the county seat, when they built the wastewater infrastructure, it was for the few white people that lived in town, because Lowndes County is majority Black. And the white people got the wastewater infrastructure. The Black people got the lagoon next to their property and smaller pipes, worse infrastructure. And that's why sewage is coming back into their homes and coming back into their yards right now. And what we're finding is that in a lot of these cases where you find that people are still living, we invited the UN Special, this was before Donald Trump, but we invited the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty to come to Lowndes County because of the issues that were happening there. And I've been fighting this for 19 years. So,
Catherine, what is the racial demographics of your county? Because,
80%
in urban America,
American.
most people think rural America means white America. It seems like it is very wrong impression. So what is the demographic in your county?
My county is 80% African American. If you go throughout the Black Belt region of the U.S., which primarily in some cases there are cities from South Carolina, probably to Texas, but a lot of that is populated by people of color.
Okay, so tell me this: if anyone of you know, how many counties will there be in which people of color are in majority and they are treated differently than the counties where whites are in majority?
I don't know the number, but I can tell you all of them are treated differently. I don't think that you can find one that's majority Black that can be held up as an example of the equality that should exist in the United States of America. That is what we're struggling with and grappling with now. I think that's why we're having these conversations at places like the Equal Justice Initiative, which is where I work, and these conversations that are happening around the country about dealing with racism in a way. I mean, the one thing I will give Donald Trump credit for is bringing it to the surface where we can no longer pretend like it does not exist, because we saw that when people stormed the Capitol and were not arrested, but people were shot and killed during Black Lives Matter protests. Some of these people are walking free. And then there are people that are pulled over. I mean, in every community, even in rural communities, you got to be concerned about being pulled over and actually may not make it out alive. But one of the things the Equal Justice Initiative has documented is all the lynchings that have took place primarily in rural communities throughout the United States of America of people of color.
Okay.
I would add to Catherine's comment too. And I think, for white rural Americans, when they sort of see the way they conceptualize politics, oftentimes they sort of see all of these resources are going to the cities, and they actually see these as resources going to people of color. And so they understand their rural consciousness is not simply just a geographic consciousness, it's also a race consciousness too. And I think that's pretty strongly informed within that.
So let's talk. I mean, as Catherine County is very different than other counties, how rural areas differ from, say, north, south, and west in their consciousness or demographic makeup?
I think both. I think it's different in both ways because, first of all, Lowndes County is kind of unique because Lowndes County is where the original Black Panther Party was founded. Lowndes County was one of those places where, at the end of slavery, there was an intentional there were intentional policies that were made to control the labor that I think still exist today. That's why you don't have living wages in some parts of Alabama, because people are so used to getting it free and they don't want to pay people for a day's work. So I think you have that kind of consciousness. Then you look at the fact that it was in the early 1900s that W.E.B. Du Bois actually came to Lowndes County and did a labor study that a lot of people don't even look at or acknowledge. But what he found is that it was so, what they found was so devastating that the Department of Labor that financed the study at the time would not even release it to the public, because the sharecropping situation that was set up there was pretty much another form of slavery. You know.
Tell me how rural black and rural white interact.
Well, just my experience has been in rural communities. I think that the biggest divide is in terms of resources and in terms of Sunday morning. You know, otherwise, if our house burned down, my white neighbor was going to bring me something too. So I think that what people imagine sometimes is not the type of extremism that we tend to see on television now, or see espoused by some of these white supremacist groups, because we've had to coexist. And after the 1960s, at least my experience was that the only time that I really, other than the structures that were set up in the county, like the black schools being the training schools and the white schools being the high schools, other than that, if I were to interact with my neighbor, the interaction in most cases was very positive, because we had to be self-sufficient and we had to rely on each other. There was nobody else to rely on. You know, even in terms of if you have a county like Lowndes County, it's 714 square miles and seven sheriff deputies. They can't patrol the entire county. You have to support each other. If you don't support each other, then of course you end up suffering together. So that was one of my experiences. Now, however, there are other people that may have had different kinds of experiences as it relates to that. But I have found that we just had last year, for an example, the black sheriff in Lowndes County, Alabama, was killed by a young white man. And people rallied together. That was one of the few times that I saw where people from the black churches and the white churches came together, because everybody loved Big John. And the young man that killed him, his father was a police officer in Montgomery. But you know, it was a situation, we're still looking to see what justice is going to look like at the end of the day. But clearly the entire community suffered and still are trying to deal with that loss, because it was very tragic.
So, Eric, it seems that what happened during the Black Lives Matter in urban America, that some of the marches were a large number of young white marching. In this case, it happened in rural America as well. So it seems that there is some overlapping of that rural-urban consciousness. Also, you know, when you look at the surveys, yes, Trump has advantage in rural areas, but it was not a, you know, overwhelming sweep. You know, according to some surveys, you know, 40% of rural America or slightly higher went for Hillary, but majority did go for Trump. So it seems that you know, rural America is not as off limits to other ideas, and the ideas were normally associated with urban areas.
Well, I think there's a couple other things to keep in mind about rural America. One of which is we have the rural America of the South that Catherine's describing, and then there's other rural America. So there's rural America, for example, of Texas and the Midwest, where you have increasing Latino populations who are coming in, and they are diversifying rural America in new kinds of ways and kind of creating new community challenges. You have in the upper Midwest, you have other immigrants coming in, like say, for instance, African immigrants who are coming in, for example, in Minnesota. So rural America is beginning to change and diversify, just as the United States is. Maybe not in the same way that you would find in the cities, but there is change that's happening. I think the other thing that's interesting about here, when you think about rural America, is there's rural America. It's not all just farms. There are towns and there are smaller cities, and these places themselves can be very diverse. I mean, one thing when we think about politics, if you look at the Democratic voting and if you look at rural America, the more that you move into a town and the more you move into a small city, the greater your Democratic vote share goes, even if you are in technically rural America writ large. So there's a sort of steady increase here. And so even if it is, we like to make these generalizations about rural America, but there is within rural America these tractable differences that we can measure here.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we're discussing with Professor Oliver and Catherine Flowers about understanding rural America. We'll be right back after these messages.
My wife, who she's a professor at the University of Cincinnati, who's Catholic, and by her watching and listening to our 3-year-old son watch Adam's World, she ended up taking Kalima Shahada. She embraced Islam because she learned so much about Islam and the other prophets. It really affected our life in a great way, and because of Sound Vision and Adam's World, we're Muslims.
I took my Shahada 15 years ago, and I actually am from a rural part of Ohio. And so I found the catalog for Sound Vision, and I ordered the tapes and the CDs and the books, and I used those, and especially for my little daughter, that's how we basically learned our Islam, and Islam entered our hearts through the wonderful works of Sound Vision.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, brother. I just want you to know that I love the Sound Vision website, that a lot of times when I'm looking for information, especially as it relates to homelessness, domestic violence, and women issues, I go to that website, and then I see what you've written, and then I copy and paste it, and spread the word, because the wisdom is there, so I can't do any better than what Sound Vision has already done.
Sound Vision is our survival guide. It is the organization that provides skills for Muslims how to survive and thrive in this community here in the U.S.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Anam, I'm in 11th grade, and I grew up with Adam's World, and what it taught me was unity, respect, and love for the Muslim Ummah.
Adam's World is the greatest show ever made. Take me to the Kaaba, man. I love that puppet.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Eric Oliver and Catherine Flowers. Will this be correct statement that majority of Native Americans are part of rural America?
I'll let Dr. Oliver answer that one.
I would think so. I mean, that's a harder one to know because of how with the expansion of metropolitan areas, like for example, there are a lot of metropolitan areas now that include counties that hold reservations and reservation communities. But and so the Native American experience is actually beginning to diversify. But I think probably with most of the tribal reservations that we would identify as autonomous political regions are still in predominantly rural areas. There are a few exceptions, like say, for example, in New England and in the Midwest. But as when you get to the western part of the United States, that's definitely the case.
Catherine, do you think the people in rural America practice their faith more?
I don't know if we practice our faith more, and I still consider myself to be a country girl. So, but I know we definitely practice our faith, because a lot of the social organizations around the church or the religious institution, that is where, you probably would see a lot of people gather. And I know that funerals even in Lowndes County are a big event. Especially prior to COVID, because everybody was related or they were connected in some way, and people would go and pay their respects. So I don't know. That's a tricky one. I can't say that we're more connected to faith, but faith is definitely a part of the rural existence, I believe.
The reason I'm asking is that, in the urban areas of America, on Sunday morning, you don't see all these streets with walking people. And only once or twice I was in rural America, and for some reason I came out. I said, well, "Why everybody is dressed up? Where are they going?" So it seems that church going in America is stronger in the rural area. It seems like.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to walk to church, because there's no Uber or bus service located in these rural communities. And we actually got together because back then, a lot of the churches did not have pastors that were there every Sunday. They were circuit pastors. So they may be there first and second, or one church they would be there first and third Sunday, and the next church they may be there second and fourth Sunday, different pastors. So, but we had Sunday school every Sunday. So I am definitely shaped by the experience that I got growing up and my faith walk, because when everything that my parents taught me was tied to something that was related to our faith. And I believe that people in rural communities are still very faithful. If you plan an event, say if you want to plan an event, at least here, I can't speak for other parts of the US, but if you plan an event in most of the rural communities that I'm familiar with, it's going to have to end at a certain time on Saturday night or it's early Sunday morning, or people are going to start leaving because they got to go to church. You can't plan events that will conflict with that, because if you plan something that will conflict with it, then the church is going to win out. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure, but based on my experience, I do know that people are, they do worship. You'll find a lot of, even people that live in the cities, we have a lot of the graveyards are in, where their families are buried, the family plots are in rural communities. And a lot of times people bring the bodies back home buried.
I was looking at different surveys about rural America to prepare for this show. And Washington Post and Kaiser Foundation has one survey, which is 2017, so a little older. And they have about, I think, 15 or 20 different problems, and they're comparing rural area with urban and suburban areas. And only one area which is very distinct, of course, it's a public opinion, asking what is the number one problem, biggest problem they have. 21% people said unemployment is the major problem, as compared to 6 people in the cities. Of course, it is 2017 we are talking about. And other things will be, if difference will be in 1% or something like that. Most of the differences in rural, suburban, and urban, except, of course, crime, urban was way higher than the rural areas. But the most distinct, without any parallel, was 21% people saying unemployment is the biggest problem. At that time, cities people say 6% and suburban says 7%. Why is that? That is a huge difference. What is the reality of it, which you see, Kathleen, there?
I think the reason why we have the type of unemployment that exists in rural communities is because, as Dr. Oliver said earlier, is that there are no jobs, and a lot of these places where we could potentially compete for the type of jobs that people tend to leave the area to get, the infrastructure doesn't exist to support that type of development or that type of sustainable development that should happen. And as a result, people go in other places. If I look at we've had these discussions recently, some of my friends and I, we were talking about how do we inspire young people in rural communities. And we say we got to look at these folk that have left, that have gotten educations and couldn't go back home, because if you're an engineer, you're a chemical engineer, or you're a mechanical engineer, even a civil engineer, how are you going to be able to make a living if you go back to some of these rural communities? So the lack of investment in infrastructure, I believe, is one of the reasons. But I also believe the hope for rural communities to change that is that we're going to have to change the infrastructure, and we're going to have to build infrastructure to support communities that will have to move away from these coastal cities because of climate change.
So the challenge, you mentioned absence of infrastructure doesn't allow people opportunities for employment. There is a talk of huge investment in infrastructure. Trump talked about it. He compared the LaGuardia Airport in New York with the Dubai Airport in the Middle East and all that. And I was looking really, for this one, I would have gone with him. Give me better than LaGuardia. I simply just find that airport to be horrible airport anywhere. So, so people talk about infrastructure, but 90% of America is rural America. Building infrastructure there will bring in the question of cost effectiveness, because it will take much more to rebuild that type of rural America in terms of infrastructure than where population centers exist. So do you see any hope people going to invest in infrastructure in the rural areas?
I think that's part of the rural bias, that when people start putting profit or money over basic human rights like sanitation and infrastructure for water or roads, or people who can have protection from storms, all the things that people feel that you should have in Chicago that we shouldn't have in Lowndes County. And I think that's a large part of the rural biases. But we've seen that they've invested over and over again in these cities, and what do they get? You get lots of crime. We still have environmental justice issues. You still have people with lead in the water. But do we stop investing? No, we continue to do it. And I believe that rural Americans are entitled to having the same type of investment that you have in a city. And that has been part of the problem that I've tried to highlight in terms of what I call a rural bias. Because we got to stop placing more value on money than we have on people's lives. That's why we have so many people of color and people with healthcare disparities dying of COVID. They closed a lot of the rural hospitals. And now here we have vaccines that you can't even really take to some of these rural areas right now because we don't have anywhere to put them. And people there need to have access to those, because those are the ones that are working a lot of these essential jobs in these cities and dying.
Well, Catherine, you're talking about rural America COVID situation. In Chicago, where I am based, 70% of people who have died are people of color. So it seems in rural and urban, if there is one thing common, is absence of equal health opportunities, or type of economic status in which people live differently. Eric, do you see, in a country which is built on capitalism, do you see people going to invest enough in rural America to bring to create those type of job opportunities which will bridge this divide? 6% unemployment in the cities in 2017 versus 21% in rural areas.
Sure. And I to kind of build on what Catherine was saying, what I would say is I think we need to rethink infrastructure. The problem that we have is we have kind of this outdated model of what infrastructure looks like. And it's based on an urban idea of infrastructure. And, take the idea of, Catherine's mentioning sewage, which is a big problem in a lot of rural areas. And, we oftentimes rely on, farms or houses in rural areas to have their own septic systems. Well, why not, instead of trying to invest in some sort of massive piping system, let's up our technology when it comes to sort of sewage treatment. And so allowing, homes to become more self-sufficient if they're spaced around and farther apart, let them have, better access to their own clean water, their own ability to treat sewage. And we can help foster technology to do that and help subsidize this rather than sort of saying that's probably a lot cheaper than having to put in a whole new set of pipes. There are some types of issues, though, that I think we also need to rethink, and they have to do with, like, say, broadband access. These communities, if we want to bring jobs and job creation to these communities, and I think there's one thing that COVID has taught us is that place and our perceptions of place may be different. I think a lot of people now, post-COVID, are rethinking, okay, well, what does the city actually offer me? And what does a rural area offer me? And rural areas are beginning to look, for a lot of people in cities, much, much more appealing. I know that in certain parts of the country, there are a lot of sort of counties that are outside of metropolitan areas where, like, home sales have gone way up because there are a lot of people in the cities who want to get out. And the reason what's maybe keeping them from staying in those communities might be broadband access. So, where we want to put our infrastructure dollars there, let's invest in broadband. I think when it comes to healthcare too, having the idea of a mobile delivery of healthcare provision.
That's what Elon Musk is doing. He's putting satellites up there to cover rural America.
Yeah,
I'm proud to say that our satellite covers rural America more than it covers all, but it is benefited more in the rural area where the regular television may not be accessible. But in that way, capitalist world will have to be a little humble because a lot of experiment is being done how independent communities and independent villages can handle sewage and water issues in Africa and Asia. A lot of experimentation in this area. And that is not very, very costly solutions which they are thinking of. So if people from here look around outside our country where infrastructure, as you rightfully say, Eric, infrastructure to Trump means LaGuardia Airport versus the Dubai Airport. Rural area will be not looking for that. That's a very, very good point there. But I think that will require us to start thinking out of box and looking at the places where we don't normally look. Otherwise, investing in infrastructure in the urban style in rural America of 90% of America is going to be just impossible if it is projected that way. So, Catherine, has your organization approached the new administration when they're already thinking of putting $3 trillion? I don't know whether that happens or not, but what will be the shape of how they will be thinking in terms of rural areas infrastructure?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm talking with social impact investors from around the world because the wastewater problems are not just in the United States, they're around the world. And oftentimes when people look at solutions, these are not solutions that local people are willing to accept. And I think we can do better. In terms of the administration, I serve on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force and helped craft a lot of what was in the executive order that the president put forth on environmental justice. So in part of that executive order, if you read it, it mentioned wastewater infrastructure. So, and I served on that committee with Gina McCarthy, who is now the climate czar, and I also served with the person who is now the climate envoy, John Kerry. So I believe that this administration, probably more than any administration up to this particular time, will have an impact and would like to do the things that are necessary to make sure that rural America doesn't get left behind anymore, because they reached out to me on more than one occasion, and I'm not I'm not a politician. I don't have a television show. I just represent people in the grassroots, and they're very interested in making sure that those voices are heard, and I appreciate it.
So Eric, do you feel that Democrats know enough about the rural America to essentially change the way they play their politics?
Well, this is where it becomes kind of an interesting political dynamic because, in most parts of the country, Republicans are ascendant in rural America. And the other funny thing about American national politics is that if you look at the way Senate representation is set up, rural interests are overrepresented in our political system. But they're overrepresented and ensconced in the Republican Party. And, a lot of the issues that have to do with, say, environmental justice or social welfare that would really, really benefit rural Americans aren't necessarily on the agenda of a lot of these Republican elected officials. And I think what Democrats should do is that this is an opportunity to recognize as a way of actually building some bipartisanship on these are the types of issues that presumably the Republican colleagues who might not otherwise want to cooperate with them would see this as benefits for their primary constituents. If I'm a senator from North Dakota or Montana, I see that, a large number of my constituents are cut off from healthcare services. They're cut off from infrastructure. They have issues of unemployment. And they're going to be really, they'd be very, very receptive for these kinds of initiatives that we've been discussing.
When you were serving in this commissions or committees between Bernie Sanders and Biden campaign, did you notice, Catherine, that they saw that as an opportunity in which bipartisanship could work?
Yes, I think that it was an opportunity just based on my own experience. In my book, Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret, I talk about even the relationship I had with Jeff Sessions here in Alabama. And in this work that helped me was Bob Woodson, who is a Black political conservative. So I can't exist and get anything done in a state like Alabama without experiencing and being able to reach out to people on the other side of the aisle. That's why politically I'm an independent, because I have to work with everybody, because at the end of the day, these issues impact all of us. And I have to help people, no matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to see that they're impacted by it too. And the only way we're going to solve this problem is to work together.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for enlightening us. Professor Eric Oliver, I still need to talk to you sometime about why Democrats and Republicans name their children differently.
Okay.
That seems to be the real research which America is interested in.
Okay.
And thank you so much, Catherine Flowers, for your work. And I hope to hear from you whatever hope you have from this administration about changes in the rural America will come to fruition. Good luck with that. And thank you so much. And thank you, Sherdil Khan and Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. And thank you for watching. Muslim Network TV is there 24/7. So stay tuned for other programmings. We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, which covers the whole United States of America, Canada, and Mexico, with 57 million subscribers in rural America. We are on OTT devices like Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Roku, or you download our app on your phones, or look for internet or YouTube and Facebook. Our website is muslimnetwork.tv. Peace. Salam.